At 71, Steve Largent speaks with the calm of a man who has carried silent truths for far too long. The world remembers him as the disciplined receiver who never shouted, never complained, never played for the spotlight. He was the quiet storm of Seattle, the man whose roots were carved with precision and whose hands felt as reliable as sunrise. Yet behind that calm exterior lived a collection of hidden conflicts that shaped every catch, every yard, every decision he ever made. They were not the loud scandals that tabloids chase. They were deeper. They were the kinds of truths that linger inside a man for decades until age finally forces him to confront them. These 5 revelations did not break him. They defined him. They sculpted the competitor he became and the legacy he left behind. Some were born from rivalries that cut deeper than fans ever knew. Others came from personal battles that could have derailed his rise before it even began. One truth in particular haunted him through every record he shattered. Why would a legend who built a career on grace and discipline carry such heavy memories? Why would a man known for silence choose now to speak? And why did he keep these 5 truths hidden for nearly half a century? Stay with this story, because once these truths emerge, you will never look at Steve Largent in the same way again. Long before he became the face of Seattle football, Steve Largent was a quiet kid from Tulsa who learned early that life rarely hands out kindness. He was not born with blistering speed or overwhelming size. He was not the prototype scouts admired. What he carried instead was something harder to measure. A stubborn discipline, a belief that precision could defeat raw power, a conviction that every detail mattered. That conviction would eventually turn him into one of the most reliable receivers of the 20th century. When he arrived in the league in the mid-70s, he was nearly overlooked. The Houston Oilers drafted him, but never saw the value in him. They traded him before he caught a single pass. It was a dismissal that could have ended his dream before it truly began. Seattle gave him a chance. He repaid them by rewriting the record book. Season after season, he built his legacy in silence. No theatrics, no headlines demanding attention, just routes run with the exactness of a craftsman and catches made with hands trained by repetition. Fans admired him because he played the game the way they imagined it in their youth. Honest, precise, humble. Yet, the NFL he entered was not built for gentlemen. Behind every Sunday roar lived a world of politics pressure and emotional battles that left many players fractured. Largent navigated these forces with a calm surface, but beneath that surface lived moments that challenged his belief in fairness and loyalty. His clashes were never chaotic. They were cold, subtle, marked by principles rather than anger. These conflicts shaped his transformation from a quiet receiver into a leader whose voice carried weight far beyond the huddle. As the Seahawks evolved, he became more than a star. He became the emblem of what the franchise wanted to be. He played through pain that would have sidelined others. He became the anchor of an offense that relied on his consistency. He earned respect not by imposing force, but by outlasting doubt. By the time he approached the twilight of his career in the late 80s, he held records once thought untouchable. Still few understood the internal storms he managed along the way. Those storms created 5 hidden truths. They came from betrayals that shaped him, rivalries that hardened him, and moments in which the game asked him to choose between pride and survival. These truths followed him into retirement and into the surprising political career that came afterward. To understand his rise, his decline, and his silence, we must uncover each truth one by one. The first hidden truth in Steve Largent's story begins with a man who never meant to become an adversary, a head coach whose voice defined the early years of the Seahawks and whose expectations could either lift a career or quietly destroy it. Jack Patera was known for toughness and a sharp competitive edge. He valued strength, speed, and physical dominance. To him, the league belonged to athletes who overwhelmed opponents with force. When Largent arrived, Patera admired his work ethic but questioned whether a receiver without elite athletic tools could survive in a league filled with giants. His doubts were not personal. They were structural. He believed the game was evolving away from players like Largent. The conflict began quietly. It lived in small decisions. Largent noticed that during early practices, he was often grouped with fringe players rather than starters. Route combinations rarely included him in the primary read. Coaches evaluated him with the same phrasing over and over. Good hands limited ceiling. The message was simple. He could be reliable, but he might never be great. For a man who built his life around proving people wrong, those doubts settled deep. He studied film longer, ran routes alone after practice until the stadium lights dimmed. He believed precision could outmatch any athletic gap. Yet he also understood that if his own coach did not fully trust him, his career could collapse before he had a real chance. The moment that defined the rivalry came in a mid-season game during his second year. Seattle faced a defense known for brutal press coverage. Early in the week, Patera privately told an assistant that Largent might struggle. When the game began, the defense targeted him with hits designed to break rhythm. Instead of disappearing, Largent responded with one of the most composed performances of his career. He beat the press with footwork that looked like a craftsman carving space. He made catches that pulled the offense back from collapse. Late in the fourth quarter, he ran a double move that froze the corner and found the end zone. The crowd roared. The sideline erupted. Largent walked back to the bench in silence, knowing Patera had just witnessed what doubt had fueled. After the game, Patera praised him publicly, but privately the divide remained. Largent respected him as a coach, yet he never forgot the early skepticism. It stayed with him as a reminder that in the NFL, belief is fragile. A player can lose it with one mistake or earn it only after years of perfection. Largent used that memory as fuel for the rest of his career. The cold truth is simple. Steve Largent never fully forgave the doubt. It sharpened him, hardened him, and shaped the way he approached every practice. He carried that truth for decades. It was the first lesson that greatness often begins in the shadow of disbelief. The fourth truth in Steve Largent's story belongs to a rivalry so physical and so personal that it followed him for years. The NFL of the late 70s and early 80s was a different world. Rules were thinner, hits were heavier, and defensive backs were allowed to turn games into street fights. Among them was a cornerback whose name became tied to Largent in a way neither man ever expected. Mike Harden of the Denver Broncos was everything Largent was not. He was aggressive, unpredictable, and fueled by intimidation. His style was built on disruption. If he could fracture a receiver's rhythm, he could fracture the entire offense. Harden saw Largent as a target because quiet players were often the easiest to unsettle. The conflict began in a divisional matchup that both teams needed. Largent lined up across from Harden and felt the tone before the first snap. Harden shoved him after the whistle, grabbed his jersey between plays, and whispered taunts intended to break concentration. Most receivers reacted with anger. Largent reacted with silence. But beneath that silence, the rivalry took root. Harden knew his tactics were working and escalated them. He hit Largent late on crossing routes, pushed him out of bounds when the play was already dead, and made sure every catch came with a reminder that he controlled the physical space. For Largent, it was not just disrespect. It was a direct attack on his belief that precision could outmatch hostility. The defining moment arrived 1 year later. Early in the season, Seattle met Denver again. The game unfolded normally until a play across the middle changed everything. The ball sailed past Largent. He never touched it. The whistle sounded. Then Harden appeared with a blindside forearm to the head that left Largent crumpled on the turf. It was a hit with no purpose except harm. The stadium gasped. Teammates sprinted toward him. For a few seconds he did not move. When he finally rose, his eyes were filled not with anger, but with a clarity that comes only when a man has been stripped of illusion. He understood that some opponents did not respect skill or professionalism. They respected only force. The rivalry stayed quiet for a season until fate offered a moment of reckoning. In a later game, Harden caught a short pass and turned upfield. Largent came from behind with a clean but devastating hit that separated Harden from the ball and left the crowd roaring in disbelief. It was legal. It was controlled. Yet it carried the weight of a man who had remembered every insult, every shove, and every unnecessary blow. After the play, Largent did not celebrate. He simply walked back to the huddle. Teammates knew exactly what had happened. The ledger had been balanced. The cold truth is this: Steve Largent forgave many men in football, but he never forgave Mike Harden. That rivalry revealed the darker side of the game and taught him that respect is not always earned through excellence. Sometimes it must be claimed through a moment of undeniable force. The third hidden truth shaping Steve Largent's legacy was not born on the field. It grew behind closed doors. It lived in meeting rooms where decisions were made by men in suits who never bled for a single yard. As Largent's career reached its peak, his loyalty to Seattle seemed unquestionable. He had become the franchise's heartbeat. Yet loyalty in the NFL is a fragile currency. It lasts only as long as the front office chooses to honor it. And for Largent, the first real fracture happened when the organization failed to understand the cost of greatness. The conflict began with a series of contract negotiations in the mid-'80s. Largent had already built a resume that placed him among the finest receivers in football. He set records with consistency rather than spectacle. But when it came time to extend his contract, the front office approached him with a tone that felt dismissive. They argued that his lack of elite speed lowered his long-term value. They claimed the system, not the player, created his success. Their language was subtle yet cutting. It suggested that he was replaceable. For a man who had carried the offense through seasons of instability, it felt like betrayal. The situation worsened when the team pursued younger receivers in the draft and free agency, without involving him in conversations. Largent never demanded control, but he expected respect. He believed a franchise should treat its foundational players with transparency. Instead, he learned about decisions through whispers from teammates and reporters. The message grew clearer each month. The organization loved what he produced, but it did not fully value the man behind the numbers. The defining moment came during a late-season stretch when the Seahawks struggled to move the ball. Despite his age, Largent remained their most dependable weapon. Yet the front office quietly discussed reducing his role to accelerate the development of younger players. When word reached him, it struck deeper than any hit he ever took. He had sacrificed his body for the franchise. He had played through injuries that doctors warned against. He had built his reputation on reliability. And now the team he anchored seemed ready to write the final chapters of his career without him. What happened next became one of the quiet turning points in Seattle history. Largent entered the following season with an intensity that even teammates had not seen before. Practices became battlegrounds where he refused to show any sign of slowing down. Games became statements. Every catch was a reminder that greatness does not fade because someone in an office believes it should. His performance forced the front office to reconsider. He reclaimed his status not through negotiation, but through undeniable production. The cold truth is clear. Steve Largent never forgot that the organization he loved once questioned his worth. That truth did not destroy him. It fueled him. It taught him that the NFL is a business long before it is a brotherhood. And it reminded him that even legends must fight to protect their legacy. The second truth in Steve Largent's journey reaches into the heart of the Seahawks locker room. Rivalries with opponents were expected. Conflicts with coaches were manageable. But the fracture that cuts deepest is the one that forms between teammates, especially when trust is the cornerstone of a man's identity. Largent was respected for his composure and quiet leadership. Teammates admired him. because he represented stability in a sport defined by chaos. Which is why the tension he experienced with a fellow offensive player became one of the most painful chapters of his career. For years he never discussed it publicly, but those close to the team felt the divide. The conflict began subtly. The Seahawks were transitioning to a new identity, one built around a more aggressive offensive system. With that transition came a young receiver hungry for targets and headlines. His talent was unquestioned, but his approach clashed with Largent's core values. He spoke loudly in meetings, demanded the ball, and challenged coaches when he felt overlooked. Largent believed in earning opportunities through discipline. The younger receiver believed in forcing the game to revolve around him. As the offense shifted, so did the internal balance. Suddenly, Largent found himself competing not just for targets, but for the leadership of the receiving corps. The tension escalated during a crucial game when miscommunication derailed a key drive. Largent ran the designed route. The younger receiver broke off his assignment and drifted into Largent's space, allowing the defender to jump the throw. The interception killed momentum and led to a sideline confrontation. Largent rarely raised his voice, but that day he did. He challenged the young receiver's commitment to the system. The receiver fired back, accusing Largent of resisting change. Teammates stepped between them, but the fracture had already taken shape. Coaches attempted to smooth the tension, yet neither man forgot the moment. For Largent, it represented a betrayal of discipline. For the younger receiver, it was a challenge to his ambition. The defining moment arrived later that year when the Seahawks faced a must-win game. Late in the fourth quarter, the quarterback looked to Largent for a critical third-down conversion. The play was one they had executed countless times. But as Largent broke into his route, the younger receiver drifted too close, again pulling a defender into the throwing lane. The pass fell incomplete. Seattle punted. The game slipped away. In the locker room afterward, silence weighed heavier than frustration. Largent understood then that loyalty within a team is not automatic. It must be shared to survive. And not every teammate values the same code. Despite the tension, Largent chose professionalism. He did not retaliate. He taught through example, not confrontation. The young receiver eventually matured, crediting Largent years later for shaping his career without ever seeking recognition. But the truth remained. That season tested Largent's belief in brotherhood. It forced him to accept that not all teammates carry the same commitment to the craft. The cold truth is this: Steve Largent never forgot the sting of that fracture. It reminded him that even within a shared jersey, trust can be fragile and loyalty can be tested by ambition. The deepest truth Steve Largent carried did not belong to a rival, a coach, or a teammate. It belonged to a moment, a single game that scarred him in ways statistics could never reveal. Largent built his legacy on discipline and faith in the purity of the sport. He believed that if a man prepared relentlessly and honored the game would honor him back. But there came a Sunday that shattered that belief, a day when football revealed its darkest side and forced him to confront a truth he never wanted to face. The conflict began long before kickoff. Seattle entered the matchup, beaten down by injuries and exhausted by a brutal schedule. Coaches were tense. Players were frustrated. The front office demanded wins to justify changes already brewing behind the scenes. Largent felt the weight more than most. He had become the emotional anchor of the team. When the pressure mounted, teammates looked to him for calm. But beneath that calm lived a storm. The Seahawks were slipping, and Largent sensed that the franchise he had helped carry was nearing a crossroads. The defining moment happened early in the second half. On a 3rd and long, Largent ran a crossing route designed to expose a vulnerable part of the defense. As he planted his foot, the linebacker trailing him grabbed his jersey and yanked him off balance. The ball sailed toward where he should have been, but the officials swallowed their whistles. The interception that followed shifted the game permanently. Seattle lost momentum. The sideline erupted in disbelief. Largent stood alone, stunned. He had been held, pulled, and illegally redirected, yet no flag appeared. It was the kind of missed call that changes careers. For Largent, it changed something deeper. It shook his trust in the fairness of the game. The tension grew later that quarter when another play spiraled into chaos. Largent ran a sideline route, reached for a high throw, and was shoved violently out of bounds by a defender long after the ball sailed incomplete. The hit slammed him into a metal bench. Teammates rushed toward him. Fans booed. Again, no flag. Largent rose slowly, his ribs screaming, his hands shaking. In that moment, he realized something devastating. The rules he respected were not protecting him. The system he believed in could fail him. The purity he cherished could be disrupted not by opponents, but by indifference. The moment that sealed the truth came in the final minutes. Seattle trailed by a touchdown. The offense marched downfield. Largent ran a perfect route on 4th down and caught a pass that clearly crossed the marker only for officials to mark the ball short. The stadium erupted in disbelief. Coaches pleaded, players protested. The ruling stood, the game slipped away. When Largent walked off the field, his belief in football was shaken to its foundation. For a man who lived by consistency and integrity, the realization cut deep. The sport he loved could be unfair, arbitrary, and cruel. It was a truth he carried for years, hidden under the surface of his calm demeanor. The cold truth is this. That game taught Steve Largent that even the purest competitor cannot escape the chaos of a flawed system. It did not break him, but it transformed the way he viewed the game forever. There was one truth Steve Largent rarely acknowledged, even in his most reflective moments. It did not come from conflict or rivalry. It came from friendship. The kind built in quiet locker rooms and long practices under fading afternoon light. Before Largent became the face of Seattle's offense, he developed a bond with a fellow receiver whose personality complemented his own. They were opposites. Largent was precise and quiet. His friend was loose, charismatic, and instinctive. Together they formed a balance that steadied the offense through the Seahawks' earliest years. The conflict that shaped this hidden truth did not begin with anger. It began with opportunity. As the franchise evolved, the front office pushed for changes that would bring in new talent. Coaches debated rotations, roles, and long-term plans. One offseason, the team made a decision that blindsided Largent. His closest friend in the locker room was released without warning. There was no farewell meeting, no explanation beyond the cold language of roster management. One day they were teammates. The next, he was gone. The defining moment came when Largent arrived at the facility and found his friend's locker emptied. The absence felt heavier than he expected. It was a reminder that in professional football, relationships are often temporary, even when they feel permanent. Teammates can become brothers, but the league decides when the bond ends. For a man who valued loyalty and consistency, the departure struck a deep chord. The cold truth is this. Steve Largent learned that even the closest friendships can be casualties of the business. It was a lesson that hardened him and prepared him for the realities of leadership. He never spoke publicly about how much it affected him, but those who knew him understood. It was the quiet heartbreak that shaped the second half of his career. As Steve Largent moved toward the final stretch of his career, the truths he had carried for years began to weave together into something larger than any single rivalry or disappointment. They formed the foundation of a legacy built not only on records and elegance, but on resilience. Each conflict, each betrayal, each moment of doubt carved a new line in the structure of the man he became. And in the quiet spaces between games, Largent began to understand that greatness is rarely a straight line. It is shaped by friction, sharpened by disbelief, and refined by the pressures that threaten to break a player long before they lift him. His conflicts with coaches taught him that faith must be earned continually. His rivalries with defenders showed him that respect is not given freely. His tension with teammates revealed how fragile trust can be inside a locker room. His heartbreak with the front office taught him that loyalty is often a one-way street in the world of professional football. And his disillusionment with officiating during the game that shook him reminded him that justice on the field is not guaranteed. Together, these truths pushed him deeper into the craft. They forced him to refine his roots, discipline his footwork, and protect his focus with an almost spiritual intensity. As Seattle changed around him, Largent became the axis of the franchise. Younger players gravitated to him, not because he demanded attention, but because he represented continuity. While coaching staff shifted and front office politics churned, he remained a constant presence. His preparation never faltered. His demeanor never wavered. Even as age crept into his legs and fatigue settled into his bones, he played with a serenity that concealed the battles he fought in silence. By the time he approached his final seasons, the league had begun to recognize that his greatness was built on something rarer than highlight reels. It was built on a devotion to excellence that spanned years of adversity. His record stood not as testaments to talent alone, but as evidence of a man who refused to let conflict define his limits. The hidden truths he carried did not weaken him, they steeled him. They formed the invisible armor that allowed him to withstand pressure that would have shattered other players. One moment from his final season captures the connection between his internal battles and the legacy he left behind. Late in a pivotal game, Largent lined up wide, aware that defenders no longer feared his speed, but still feared his precision. The route called for a subtle double move, one he had run thousands of times. As he broke inside, the defender hesitated. In that instant, Largent created just enough separation to make a catch that kept the drive alive. The crowd roared as if witnessing another chapter from his prime. What they did not see was the years of frustration and determination that lived beneath that single route. They did not see the doubts that pushed him to perfect it. They did not see the rivalries that fueled his discipline. They saw only the result, the grace, the outcome of a lifetime spent answering every challenge the game threw at him. When he finally chose to retire after the 1989 season, he did so with a quiet dignity that mirrored the way he played. The league honored him with a place in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Fans celebrated his records for receptions, yards, and touchdowns. Teammates spoke of his influence, his leadership, and his ability to remain calm in storms that swallowed lesser players. Yet Largent himself rarely spoke of his internal battles. He allowed the game to remember him for what he created, not what he endured. In time, however, the truths he carried began to reveal themselves, not through dramatic interviews or emotional confessions, but through the reflections of a man who understood that legacy is not shaped solely by triumph. It is shaped by the wounds that never fully heal, the rivalries that never fade, and the knowledge that even the purest competitor is changed by the pressures of the sport. Steve Largent's life after football added a final layer to this understanding. His turn to public service showed that the qualities forged on the field translated into leadership beyond the stadium. The discipline that guided his roots guided his decisions. The conflicts that hardened him shaped his views on fairness. The betrayals that marked his career made him more sensitive to integrity. Even in retirement, the truths he carried shaped the man he became. Steve Largent passed through the NFL not as a flash of brilliance, but as a sustained force of precision and quiet intensity. The hidden truths that once weighed on him now illuminate his legacy. They reveal a man who achieved greatness, not despite conflict, but because of the way he rose above it. They show that the scars he carried were not signs of weakness. They were signatures of endurance. His story reminds us of something essential. Beyond the victories, beyond the statistics, and beyond the applause, the essence of a legend lies in the battles no one sees. And Steve Largent fought those battles with a grace that shaped the soul of Seattle football. Steve Largent's journey is a reminder that greatness is never built on talent alone. It is shaped by the conflicts a man endures, the doubts he fights through, and the truths he carries in silence until the final chapters of his life. His battles with coaches, front offices, rivals, and even the game itself reveal a deeper question. What defines a legacy? Is it the records a player leaves behind or the resilience he develops while chasing them? And how much of a legend's greatness comes from the wounds that never fully heal? Now that you have seen the 5 hidden truths that shaped Steve Largent's rise and tested his spirit, which revelation struck you the most? Was it the rivalry that exploded into one of the most memorable moments in Seahawks history? Was it the betrayal from within the organization he carried for years? Or was it the quiet heartbreak that came from losing a friend to the cold business of the sport? These moments are rarely discussed, yet they built the foundation of a career that still inspires players and fans across generations. Tell us in the comments which truth changed the way you see Steve Largent. Share your perspective on how these unseen battles shaped his greatness. Your insight keeps these stories alive and helps new fans understand the depth behind football's golden age. If you enjoyed uncovering these hidden truths and want more untold stories from the legends who defined the sport, make sure to subscribe to NFL Hidden Truths. Here we explore the rivalries, the confrontations, and the emotional journeys that shaped the icons of the 1960s through the 1990s. Join us as we continue revealing the stories that history tried to leave in the shadows.